think people hear the word investment and they think it's a very transactional role. It's actually much more about the human relationship capital. Change, I think, is really the universal challenge we have no matter what market or country or level of experience you have. You're always working through navigating change. As I always like to tell my team, like with change, there's always opportunity. But from a client management standpoint, my role really is to, similar to with my team, like filter out what matters and make sure I'm bringing my POV on these things to them. The actual product isn't everything, right? That you're buying. You're buying service and you're buying commitment and you're buying this, mutual strive to do better and to grow together.
Hello, and welcome back to the AdTech Heroes podcast. I'm your host, Jon Wallett, and in today's episode, we're exploring what it really means to put people first in our new AI-driven world. From leading through constant change to managing client expectations while nurturing talent and ultimately building strong partnerships, it's become increasingly more challenging in this automated industry. And I'm joined and delighted today to have Sascha Lock, the Executive Director, SVP of Integrated Investment at Hearts & Science. Sascha, how are we doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you, John?
I'm hanging in there. It's been an interesting couple of weeks in the industry. It's been a crazy time right now with the weather here in New York. But we're making it through. But today I'm excited to have you on because I think I want to start things off with you in particular in your career journey. I know in some of our pre-call has a pretty interesting history and story. So I want to kind of kick things off right there and tell me a little bit, tell the listeners a little bit about, what first sparked your interest overall in advertising, kind of how did we lead to, who Sascha is today?
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on too, John. Speaking of the weather in New York, I was there with all of my 3 kids this past weekend. I think I deserve some kind of medal, but my wife does as well. We only had one big tantrum that was at the 93rd floor of One Vanderbilt. Otherwise, they were fantastic. But yeah, weather did not work out for us.
That's unfortunate. Was it the height that caused the tantrum, or what brought them to that point?
Just being siblings, I think more
Yeah.
than anything. So,
Were they fascinated with the balloon room? I feel like that's a big hit with the kids when they go there.
if you know, the balloon room, that was great. But yeah, so great question. I feel like words really got me into advertising. Let me explain that a little bit. I grew up in Russia. My mom was a German interpreter in the Soviet Union. One of the few people that kind of like got to get out of the Soviet Union and translate from Russian to German. And so I grew up, speaking Russian and my mom kind of dropping German words here and there. And when we immigrated to the U.S. in the early 90s, I became just kind of fascinated with languages and people because, I was now learning English. And I always had this kind of curiosity about German, which I ended up later minoring in college. But words and communication really got me into advertising. When I was thinking about like where I want to go to school, I knew I wanted to do something in business, but I knew I wasn't great at finance. Ironic to my role today as an investment lead, but I minored in German in college. I ended up, getting my first gig here at Kara in Boston, part of the Aegis Group before Dentsu had acquired Aegis. Had a really great experience there, meeting new people. My bosses were fantastic. They really inspired me to kind of get into advertising. So when I moved to Germany to continue like my career in advertising, I worked at a small agency and was just fascinated. Cut my teeth on client service, understanding dollars and investment, and mobile advertising was just like the iPhone launched the year I started in advertising. And so this kind of thread of words and communication was really the driver for me initially, all the way to today. Communication really is what we aim to do, and connecting, people with brands, connecting ourselves with media partners and clients. I think that's what's kind of still like keeps me humming today and excited.
I love that. Yeah. And, part of the theme that we're going to be discussing today is how technology has advanced and also challenged some of that human connectivity that we seek as part of this industry and what we do as marketers. I had another question following your history, and I think it's fascinating that you got some of your experience overseas. What in your time while you're working overseas versus what you've experienced working in the US, what has been some of the difference, some of the I don't know if you could talk to some of the challenges or some of the similarities or anything that you'd think would translate between the different markets.
The challenges are pretty much universal everywhere, right? I think the industry is defined by many words. I don't want to call one word a defining word for our industry, but change management, maybe two words, change, which we're talking about on today's podcast, I think is really the universal challenge we have no matter what market or country or level of experience you have. You're always working through navigating change. I think some of the benefits, though, to that, as I always like to tell my team, like with change, there's always opportunity. And I think that is something that no matter if you're in Berlin or Stuttgart or in New York City or Los Angeles, in talking to various people at various degrees, I think, of maturity of that market and adoption with tech, because Germany at that time was a little bit behind the US. When I joined the agency in Germany, they were just launching mobile advertising, right? Where in the US, mobile was already a line item on a flowchart. Gee, wasn't that funny when mobile was its own line item on a flowchart?
I remember. I remember those days. I do. It was always going to be the year of mobile, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it always felt like the year of mobile was going to happen, and it just kept getting like pushed. But I always think it was already happening. So it's interesting to hear like the different markets that the adoption timing was altered. Personally, I lived overseas in Southeast Asia many years ago, and I remember. I mean, I'm going to age myself a little bit, but I remember you know flip phones had just kind of gone the way of the dinosaur during that moment, and the iPhone was first coming out, right? And the experience living in Seoul at the time and seeing how they were engaged with digital media versus my experience in the US was vastly different. So it kind of bleeds into your point, right? That change is inevitable, and it's how we adapt to that change that makes it exciting to work in our industry, but also to your point, like a challenge, right? But I guess that's what motivates, right?
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, and that's like for people like you and I who are curious about this industry. You would be hosting a podcast called AdTech Heroes if you weren't a curious person. I think curiosity is really what helps stay motivated, at least for me personally. And anyone who is out there and curious about where this is going, but also where it's been, right? History tells us a lot about what drives human behavior, right? It's a lot of it's cyclical. Like we think the next big thing is this massive change. And I actually heard someone say last week, which was nice, it's an evolution, not a revolution, right? It's like we're evolving and there's change, but yet nothing is really on a mass scale blowing up to the point of human behavior is ultimately, and desires and wishes and pain points are like changing. What's changing is everything beneath our feet. Like, I'll be the first to drop AI into this. I know it was going to be a race of you and I, but like AI, right? Similar to mobile advertising being on a flowchart as its own line item. I mean, how many years did it take for it to disappear? It's just mobile is everything we do, and same with AI. It's like AI is this big thing. It's the current, right? That's moving rapidly. We're trying to swim through this crazy current. But at some point, we're going to stop saying AI. We're just going to it's just going to be what everything is, right? And technology. We don't talk about the internet. I mean, we talk about connectivity. We talk about speeds, pain points of the internet, right? All of the possibilities, which is ultimately fueling AI. But like AI is going to stop being something that we're like talking about in every single pod. It's just going to become everything, right? Because that's how things are going. Yeah.
I agree. I feel like that shift is already happening. I feel like um, two things are kind of happening at the same time. I think there's not an aversion, but I'm hearing like the younger generations are they're just kind of like, all right, we're tired of hearing this term, and folks that have been in the field a long time are like, well, this term's we've already been using these tools. It's just now we're just marketing it in a certain way, or we're giving it a descriptive term rather than just understanding that. To your point, it's kind of the fabric of what makes things operate and will continue to do so. So I wholeheartedly agree with you. So I think the challenge for today is how often will we not say AI when we're attempting to express what we're talking about through our topics today. So I want to go back to a little bit more of curiosity as a point that you made earlier. Um, People who tune into this show, I'm always eager to, as we talk about your career journey, talk about your role a little bit more. What is an average day? Your title is robust executive director, integrated investment. Like, what does that mean in your day to day? And what do people kind of misunderstand about your priorities and what you're focused on?
Yeah. I think let's start with the last question you asked, which is like, what do people misunderstand? I think people hear the word investment and they think it's a very transactional role. Like I'm putting numbers on in an Excel doc and I'm moving those numbers around. It's actually much more about the human relationship capital, right? And like, think about, my role, I really see my role as like, I'm here to get the most value for our clients and my team. And I do that by trying to build the best possible relationships I can. And I think it's similar to any relationship you have with a friend or a partner, right? Great communication. Like my role is to try to create that and improve it. Create it by in terms of how I communicate. I'm a like a big believer in what David Bell called like be direct but kind. So my role is really about like trying to be the best communicator I can be to then inspire or at least, move things along, between point A to point B or person A to person B. So I think that's like the biggest misunderstanding is investment. And frankly, a lot of what this industry is kind of trending towards, right, is transaction and faster transaction. So AI or whatever the vehicle is, DSPs, right, faster signal like transfer between point A to point B to make faster decisions, to serve impressions, to then get a faster sale. That's fine. And I think that's a huge part of what we do. And we need to be like the experts of the future, right? What's happening next? But I think a lot of my role is just building great relationships to get that value. That value can manifest itself in a sale. It can be someone feeling happy leaving the job at the end of the day, logging off, right? Because I think something that is very pivotal also in understanding my role really today is mostly focused about helping my team be the best version of themselves while trying to be the best version of myself, right? It's like analogy to like me, at the top of the 93rd floor with my kids. Shit's going down and they're having a tantrum and I paid a lot of money for this tantrum, because one Vanderbilt summit's not cheap, guys. But if I can try to remain calm and be the best version of myself, right, we can get through that tough moment. And so I use a lot of analogies with my work life, with my personal life, right, as like a father, for example, as a partner. And I think that's one. It's like, exactly focusing on relationships and building good communication.
I love that. I love that. And that really plays into a great segue into some of the other topics we wanted to discuss today. Leadership, like leadership in this era of change and transformation. I think everyone has a different approach to it. And I love what you just described, where you're applying your own personal life experiences to reflect on the team, right? And to your point, as you've described, your team is foundational to the success of everything you're trying to accomplish, right? So, as a leader, how are you helping navigate this level of constant transformation with ultimately not overwhelming people? Because I think there's just so much being thrown at people all at once. How do you, on a weekly basis or a monthly basis with your team, kind of keep them more grounded with all the challenges you're facing?
I mean, to say that I can keep my team grounded is probably a statement I would disagree with respectfully. I think ultimately the team being grounded or each individual person on a team being grounded is completely up to them. What I try to practice is just, I mean, this isn't hard for me because I'm ultimately like very, very curious about the industry. I love advertising. I love meeting with partners like you and Seed Tag and figuring out what are you guys doing to change, right? To find kind of people out in the wild faster or in better using better signals. So for me, it's not hard to stay curious. I think just uh, trying to make sure I'm asking more questions than giving answers is something that like I'm trying to practice every single day, right? You mentioned like not overwhelming the teams. I think encouraging teams to focus on what matters, and sometimes that's a hard thing or it's a hard filter to put through the amount of an abundance of kind of change and news and information that our industry goes through every single day. My boss a few months ago said, like, can we just have one day when there isn't like a major acquisition? Like, please, like one day when a company doesn't say, we're going to buy another company. Well, the answer is sure, we'll have those days, but Not all the news out there matters, right? Not every single trend matters. I think, trying to prevent overwhelm is all about me personally practicing, this kind of like real time filtering of what's important to pay attention to, what trends are there that we need to maybe focus on, and what are the ones that don't really have the biggest impact or as big of an impact as those priority trends. So I think just again practicing that every single day and hopefully inspiring the team, or just people who are curious, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting way of looking at it. It's like, how do you prioritize all the constant information being thrown at you, right? And I think that in itself, this day and age, like you said, I feel like if I go on LinkedIn or if I go on any of the, trade sites, I feel like it's an abundance of information to the point where I think people are starting to feel fatigue as to A, what's real, B, what matters, and what's really a game changer, right? And I think as an industry, it excites me that there's so much information to gather and to sort through, and there's so much emerging technology. But at the same time, to your point, like it's important to realize that not everything is meant to be taken as heart, I suppose, or is going to matter to the day to day. So I guess that's what you're getting at, right? Is how do you kind of clean up some of that let's not call it sludge, but information gathering that's happening over there. And I know we talked a little bit about team and how that leadership comes into play, but your role you described earlier, it also is managing client expectations. It's leading the client through the challenges, excuse me, of the ecosystem, right? Especially with everything being focused around the age of AI. Clients are hearing a lot about big promises about what AI driven optimization and speed and automation is happening, like what's going to be doing. How do you wind up having to you know help them understand or control their expectations as things shift? Like, how do you navigate those conversations?
Yeah, a large part of it is just realizing what the role in some way of an agency person is. And I like how our CEO Ralph put it, a few weeks ago at a conference. He said, we are connectors on the agency side, that pull the pieces together and pull information together to help drive ultimately, long-term brand equity. I think like having heard that kind of, it's very much what my role, and I think a lot of good agency role is being able to connect the dots. And so with anything that comes out in terms of news or a new partner offering, first and foremost is to listen. I think I have to understand what's happening. I have to understand what that trend is or that new product release. It's just to listen and to figure out if this is something worth continuing the conversation about. But from a client management standpoint, my role really is to, similar to with my team, like filter out what matters and make sure I'm bringing my POV on these things to them, um, and presenting the facts as well as again my POV and my opinion, because I think on the agency side we're paid to be experts on everything, but we can't be experts on everything. So we have to filter out what matters, and that is, secondarily to listening and connecting the dots. I think is really understanding what matters to the client, and that is the only thing that really matters at the end of the day, right? It's what is going to drive impact for my client, and it's not like, I think a one directional thing where I present the facts, and my job is to present the facts to the client and my POV, but it's ultimately the client's choosing of what they do and how they invest their dollars. It's their budget. So from an investment leadership standpoint, when we think about testing, all of the abundance of options out there, the thousands of partners, the hundreds of CTV platforms just in the US, right? There's 200 platforms in the US, that are just on CTV. Crazy to think, right? Present the facts, the POV. They ultimately make the final call. But I haven't done my job if I haven't given them my POV on it. So
Totally. Yeah. And that goes back to your ethos of like curiosity and education. So, I think there's that balancing act that you have to also and your team has to do where how do you balance this idea of like innovation in the world of AI, but also with a lens of realism, right? When discussing those solutions. So, how do you siphon through some of that? Like, is there, questions that you're asking partners or the way you're looking at the technology as part of your evaluation process? You don't have to get too granular there, but just curious to understand how your thought process you're going through that balancing act.
Yeah, I think there's not like a list of questions I ask every partner, but over the years, I have those questions in my head, and I've kind of always had them, I guess, in some ways, because whether or not you're evaluating, a media partner, or you're going to buy, a car, there's probably certain pieces of information that you need to know. One is like, how is this different? And why am I going to buy a Kia over a Tesla? How is it different? What are the differences? And I think that's kind of like one of the first questions I ask when I'm in partner meetings is, what you're presenting is, it sounds great. How is this different from your competitors, right? And I think what I'm looking for is differentiation. Um, Especially, credit to Terry Kawaja for the Lumascape. It was, and since the hundreds of Lumascapes, for helping us organize our thinking about all of the parties involved in this ad industry, right? And Terry, if you're listening, it was great meeting you last year at a BTE dinner. But and I told this to Terry, I was like, the Lumascape was amazing, and I think that, when the year was I was in advertising, first maybe a couple of years he released the Lumascape, which, seeing that really was like, oh my goodness. And this was just one Lumascape. This is when we just had the display Lumascape, right, and
Oh,
ad
I
networks
remember
and
that.
before,
Yep.
right? And
Yeah.
since, 5 years ago in a new business pitch, of course, everyone's done the Lumascape slide in the new business pitch. Sorry, Terry, if you weren't paid out for those earnings after the. But I think, the Lumascapes have emerged, and we all showed clients, hey, look at this complex, crazy industry. And I think, again, like back to the point about agency folks, we're connectors. If we're doing our job, we're connecting the dots. It's what are the differentiating offerings out there, right? What are the partners that are standing out with their technology, or heck, the people, the service, right? Back to the terrible car analogy for just a quick sec. When I bought a Tesla, I didn't have to talk to anyone. When I bought a Kia, I had to talk to a lot of people. So, right, there's like a service level thing too. It's not just about the tech and the algorithms and all that great stuff. It's also about the people, right? And back to the point about relationships. Um, the actual product isn't everything, right? That you're buying service, and you're buying commitment, and you're buying this mutual strive to do better and to grow together. So
Yeah, yeah. I really appreciate that sentiment, and I love the shout out to Terry. He's such a character, and he definitely has done a service for the industry. To your point, I remember being a young buyer at IPG, and it's a sea of chaos sometimes with the amount of technology that's out there. So getting a North Star to kind of categorize things a little bit and shape it has always been super helpful. So we're fortunate to have people like that in the industry who help guide some of the ships. But I want to go to what you just tapped on, which is it goes back to a little bit of that human element, that theme, right? And the idea that customer service still is paramount to a lot of the success that technology companies and clients experience. So, in this world of automation, right, as that continues to increase and grow, how do you feel that the art of negotiation and partnership has changed or is changing? I still feel like there's a place for human interaction, but what have you experienced and where do you think that's going to go with the combination of this automation that we're looking at?
yeah, well, it has shifted, but then again, in some ways, it hasn't shifted. I think what hasn't shifted is, it still takes picking up the phone and sitting down at dinner with a partner to get things done. Um, we can't replace that necessarily with Teams meeting. We can't replace that necessarily with agents. We can replace some of that, but um, I think it's the shift away from just transactional negotiations over to um, valuable kind of strategic negotiations, right? What I mean by that is, when you think about, you ask a 10th grader what the word negotiation means, and to them, it's all about getting the best price. Okay, that's still part of it. That's very much still a huge part of it. We want the best price and the best value, commercial value for our client, and we do that, right? I think some of it, what has happened though, is as you've taken some of that transactional side of the industry and you've automated it through AI or you've automated it through whatever algorithm, right? That's used to actually place the money, to find the person, to serve the creative. The value really then increases with the strategic side of things, right? What about building something together? That's not necessarily something you put a CPM decrease on. In some ways, you have to think about the negotiation side as being really evolutionary, still rooted in human connections, but now more focusing on how do I get, let's say, better flexibility for our clients? How do I get better kind of strategic benefits? Um, and what that means is sometimes it means connecting the best from all the sides, right? You connect the best of the minds at Seed Tag with the best of the clients and the best of the agencies. You bring them all in a room and you let everyone nerd out and you let
Yeah,
everyone
yeah.
co-create.
I love that. It goes back to things like, you want to be that expert that's learning from both sides and also providing a human POV, right? Because when we're just transactional, you're missing the reason that we do what we do, right? And someone once told me that AI will never truly take over everything because when things go wrong, no one enjoys yelling into the phone saying, get me a representative, right? And at the same time, when things go well, we still have this need and this urge as this community that we've developed to support and congratulate each other. So I think that, you know, I think this has been a common theme every time conversations like this come up, but I think it's great to hear that that is the common theme that people continuously want that element of connectivity because that's what's going to ground the technology into humanity, right? So on that note, like, what does a strong modern like media partnership look like to you today? Like you described, some of the elements, but what does that package look like ultimately?
Um, Various pieces that are working well individually, but also together, right? I think the first piece is transparency, um, especially with things that will go wrong. Um, Not if they go wrong, but when they go wrong, because that's part of everything we do, right? The mistakes will happen, errors will happen. I think transparency and like being able to talk about openly like what happened and how to fix it. And the faster you can kind of do that and have that open conversation and how to fix it, the faster you make progress. Um, I think too, also just like accountability, right? And again, working within itself, but like together with transparency, showing up when you say you are, and you know, when you can't show up, you pick up the phone and you say this is why you can't. Um, I think is really a big piece of it. And thirdly, being okay and comfortable with like with change, right? Because again, the industry is kind of underpinned by this word of change. When things change from a like a partner standpoint or performance, we need to be able to pivot very quickly, right? We can't help our clients get the most value if we're over analyzing. I think we have to do our due diligence. We have to look at the numbers. We have to also add a flavor of intuition in there. But being able to move quickly, I think, is still very, very much key to it. So I would say transparency, accountability, and being able to pivot quickly. Speed. Yeah.
Love it. That was great. So we're coming into the tail end of some of our conversation, and I've truly enjoyed this. I love your experience. I love your story. I want to ask this before I jump into my next question, but how many languages do you actually speak now?
Well, I speak kind of English, I guess, uh, Russian and German. So
That's awesome. That's great. Next time we do this, I'm going to learn German. We'll do it all in German. So the next episode will be a German episode with you. Okay, two final questions I want to roll through with you because it sticks with some of the themes we were talking about. One being, what do you think, in your experience, are the most important conversations that agencies should be having with clients right now? That's a loaded question because there's so many different angles you could take here. But where do you feel like in this current state are some of the important dialogues that you're having with clients?
well, I would say there's a lot, but two to highlight. One is back to a kind of a very basic question. What is the goal? And I say that because I think there's a lot of ways to measure success, and even defining success, I think is where I'm getting at here. What does success look like? And really getting on the same page about that, and what are the sources of truth? And there can be multiple, and that's okay. But what does success look like? And the second, I think, most important question is, what is your risk tolerance? And I think this goes hand in hand with testing. Um, and if our risk tolerance is very low, then naturally, probably the testing that we or atmosphere that we create and operate within will change versus if our risk tolerance is a little bit higher. So I think of this as like the 70-20-10, you know, default percentage allocation of investment, right? 70 in your top performing, 20 in your like up and coming, and then 10 is what someone called once, what I really liked, kind of like the crazy AF bucket. So just go wild, go crazy, right? And what is our risk tolerance? That 10 might shrink down to one or might become zero, right? It could be at a time when we put all of our money into something that really works and we know it works, and that's okay, right? COVID was kind of like a little bit of this, a little bit of that. When the world went on lockdown and media consumption habits changed rapidly, our risk tolerance also changed. So I think it's okay to have varying degrees, and those degrees can and they should change, right? When we're in a moment of testing because sales are good, or we're in a moment of let's really focus on what works because sales are down. I think those are kind of the two main questions, and that a successful relationship and evolution of client programs looks like.
Love that answer. That was really great. Appreciate you sharing that perspective. Okay, well, let's close it up. We have usually ended on one or two different questions. Given our conversation today, I'm going to go with this one. Being that you are an ad tech hero, if you had a superpower in the ad tech space, what would that be? How would that translate?
All right. So I knew this question was coming because I've listened to your podcast before. So I actually asked a couple of people on my team, what would that power be? I delegated the question further. So the and I'll credit to Haley and Tommy on my team, but it would be Mr. Transparency, and I think it would be the superpower to really go under the algorithms and understand what's making them work. Um, not not for the sake of fighting them, but for the sake of transparency, because with all of this great technology and the promise of sales quicker and better and more efficiently, what is ultimately being lost in all of that is clients' transparency into what's happening. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what would help us in this industry is going back to, you know, better visibility on placement level, like what's happening. What about creative level? And it's gonna have to balance itself out, right? You're gonna have to be okay giving up some of that transparency for faster sales or more efficient ones. But I think as Mr. Transparency as a superpower, it would be able to go in and kind of understand more about what the algorithms are doing and why they're doing it, so that we can take those insights back to the planning stages, right? And use them to feed the next big campaign or product push or tactical like test. So I think it's probably that, and with a slightly better word than Mr.
That's one of
Transparency.
I
That
would
sounds
say,
weird.
probably one of the top 5 answers we've gotten on the podcast. That's excellent, man. So I got to thank you, Sascha. This has been a pleasure. I'm so glad you're able to join us today. I think further moving forward, I will have to refer to you as Mr. Transparency when we have calls. So I hope you don't mind that, but it's a great title to have. And I think everyone's appreciative for people like you in the industry pushing things forward and challenging the status quo. So thanks for all that you do, and thanks for joining us. And hopefully we'll get to do this again sometime soon.
Appreciate you having me on. Thank you for hosting this.
Of course, man. Anytime.